In my opinion, grimdark fantasy is the most polarizing mainstream genre of fantasy and science fiction, not only in terms of how many people are just kind of repulsed by the idea of submerging themselves into something so misery-oriented, but which books within the genres people will consider the darkest versus baby's first grimdark on the grand scale. And this is for many fascinating reasons, in my opinion. I believe that what strikes you as, quote, dark is incredibly dependent on who you are as a person. There is this scale of grimdark that, in my experience, is kind of unique to every individual who tries out the genre. And what results is this balance that authors have to walk so delicately, whether it's things I wouldn't consider grimdark at all, but I've seen people label such, like The Witcher, to things that are medium, pretty dark, like First Law, all the way to the undisputed super dark things like Black Company, Berserk, and much, much more. Even beyond that, things that I'm not even necessarily a fan of, like torture porn, exist where it's just purely there for misery's sake. But that's not necessarily bad. There's all kinds of psychological reasons why people may enjoy the far, far end of this spectrum. What I'm trying to get at, though, is authors have to figure out this foundation that can appeal to enough readers to get their intent across. Because I do believe you need to at least step into this subgenre with intent. It's got to have a dedication to crafting a tone that will deeply submerge anyone who picks up the book within it, so that the dialogue can convey so many of the themes that you have to explore with your characters that need to have a very, let's call it, motivated arc or lack thereof to instill that grim dark purpose, that nihilism that is almost an entire requirement to be considered existing in the genre. It's actually why I wouldn't call something Witcher, though I'm not going to dismiss every single individual I've seen claim that Witcher is grim dark. And then finally, the POV and the story that POV goes through has to kind of have an end goal, while very often intentionally subverting where a story that is outside the grimdark genre would go, right? You're not going to have a First Law book that ends with the hero coming out on top and everything's hunky-dory, and instead the author's going to surprise you by making you strangely attracted to a deformed torturer. Why is he so charismatic? God damn. What I'm trying to get at is it's you dependent. And there's going to, if you really sit on your selection of best grimdarks books, going to be a factor or set of factors that unify your favorites of this subgenre and are the reason you're going to put them in the order you do, because it's where your focus from your own personal experience goes. This is true for all genres to an extent, but I think more so for specifically the GD, because it's so personality filled all the time. I've never come across a grimdark story that did not bleed off the page, at least that I would consider quality. But for me, I have found that I most enjoy grimdark stories that are structuring all of this, balancing their scale on specifically criticizing. I love a story that is going to go, this is what we're talking about, whether it's one thing or a selection of related things, and we are going to be subtly, I much prefer it done subtly, crafting arguments through these experienced POVs and characters to show you the flaws that inspired this author to make an entire epic about this story, right? It's why Berserk is one of my favorites of all time. It's a story about male trauma and how often men are just left after horrific experiences expected to be tough. It's why Malazan's just gigantic message about redemption and hope and sacrifice, even if nothing comes of it, rings so powerfully. And even stories like A Song of Ice and Fire feel like there is some, I want to say, deeper meaning in terms of how much they're forcing us to hold a mirror in our own faces, that because despite the dragons being there, it's inspired by our own history and our faults that resulted in similar stories playing out, building our society. But there's one book I have consumed recently that to me managed to strike an absolutely perfect balance on this scale. It landed so that my bar is totally flat and there's no shaking whatsoever. And that would be Between Two Fires by Christopher Pullman. And now we're going to get into a review that I'm almost scared to give because I have so many thoughts on this wonderfully executed dive into the disgusting, the deplorable, the downright
demonic,
but with a very specific criticism. Between Two Fires is a medieval horror story that actually commits in every single sense of the word. In broad strokes, this story follows the disgraced knight Thomas as he comes across an orphan who is apparently speaking to angels named Delphine. They also come across a priest named Matthew and go on a rather classical style fantasy quest journey, close to Bilbo in structure and no other way. I want to make that abundantly clear, but this is taking place during medieval Europe, specifically during the Black Plague, the deepest throes of it, and also frames religion actually as it was back in medieval times, which I never realized how much of a flaw that is with so many fantasy books that take a look at Christianity. But now that I've seen it done purely, like actually from how Christianity was handled back then, it almost feels like I'll never be able to go back. And that could be this book's greatest accomplishment, but there's so much more to talk about, especially with how it actually handles and delivers its fantastical elements as well. But before we get into that, let's talk about and describe what exactly this setup is, because Thomas the Disgraced Knight is essentially just surviving in a rough world. He even gives a monologue at one point talking about how he's been the kind of monster that he hates now before. And that's actually a major continued theme throughout all of Between Two Fires, how we are only as good as our circumstances allow us to be in many ways. And no matter how much faith you have, that can be true. Only the purest and greatest can resist all evils. And that's a really complex topic once you dive deep on into it, because it's not just about, oh, I'm resisting temptation here. It's about when you're starving. It's about when someone has something and is going to feed their family with it, but you haven't eaten for weeks and you're with some people with weapons. What do? That's the level this is diving on into, and how it truly becomes medieval horror, because it's about the psychological implications of extreme circumstance, and it becomes all the more terrifying because we know, well, many of the Christian overtones in terms of the fantasy elements happening here may not have actually happened. The human acts of betrayal and depravity really did. But when Thomas comes across this girl, Between Two Fires sets the tone immediately. She's a stranger and is about to have the worst thing that can be done to a child done to her. And this is a breaking point for Thomas, and he actually prevents something awful. That's the initiating incident as far as I'll go for spoilers. And from there, he's told by this girl who apparently can talk to angels, and as much as he denies it, he can tell there's something special about this child, that she needs to get to not just Paris. The journey continues from there, but there's just a blind faith element where at a certain point, he's just going with her because that's where we're going. Okay. And when they come across a priest, Matthew, the complexities and the contradictions that exist between just the natural state of being human and what faith asks of us comes central to the narrative spotlight, and it's amplified by the fact that Between Two Fires says it's all real. And I don't mean this in any kind of offensive way to Christians. Even the stuff from the books that Christians will often say, like, nah, no, it's here. For instance, the reason the plague is happening is due to Satan. It's due to the devils and demons and stuff coming up and accursing the land and an absence of God. In fact, there is, like, the church is the frontline holy war, except that institution has been infiltrated as well, and that plays into the larger conflict too. But because demons are walking the earth, as we walk this path inside cities or just out in the world encountering a madman in a barn, you really get the duality of the terror elements here. And at times, well, despite how scary like the stone people they come across in Paris are, what's even more like creepy, what gets under your skin, is actually just the unknown with normal people at times. And I think that might be Christopher Bullman's best trait as a horror writer, is he knows that, yeah, in a world with zombies, for example, let's pivot to The Walking Dead for no reason. The zombies are scary, but that beat can only be so scary. What's all the worse is the people you'll come across who have survived in that situation. Except I would argue the situation these people are in is worse because it's not zombies. It's demons, devils, plus plague, plus lies being told from charismatic leaders. And what's cool, though, is that's kind of countered by these beacons of little bits of light. And I've talked about how in grimdark stories, I think that is so beautiful, right? Any source of holiness or good in a dark world will cast away shadows all the more brilliantly. And that's where the probably most delicate balance is actually found between two fires. This verged into Black Company territory for me at times, where it was just too much. But there's interactions that aren't even overtly nice, but Delphine talking with a merchant who might earnestly believe he has a holy relic, and the curiosity that comes from there is not even necessarily a positive motion, but there's just this human element. And this is followed up by very real bigotry and stuff that's then thrown at this merchant, and it kind of makes you hate that there's these people not only doing this awful thing to this man, but on top of that, they're squishing for you as the reader one of the few moments that felt good. Summarizing and adding a note here of a lot of what I think is being asked of Thomas. Continually, Delphine is telling Thomas not to be violent, not to kill. And early in the book, that can be viewed as almost being naive. And while it's never entirely unframed that way, one of the big revelations of the book is that simultaneously, that's what it takes. Every day, waking up, knowing that violence, that evil can be the easier path, but sticking to what's righteous and true. It's a Herculean thing to ask your average person. Unfair, but it's still what's asked, to be a good person in a black world. And so, while yes, Delphine is naive in the sense that every child is, I believe Between Two Fires is also letting us know that there can be wisdom in children. She does talk to angels. And for my interpretation as a reader, one of the things that kept striking me as someone who's not an atheist, but not Christian, I found the criticism, the setup I put at the beginning of this video, that Christopher Ballman was trying to put forward was what faith asks of us, not understanding maybe it does, and that's the problem. But like, if you put someone in an impossible circumstance, they can't be a perfect human being. Except occasionally there are those who can make a call that feels impossible. And there's this extraordinary humanity to that. And that's what Delphine represents. She is someone who's pushing Thomas to not kill, to not give in to this world that, by all logical metrics, should drive someone crazy. There are so few reprieves from beginning to end in this journey. And Thomas has even been screwed over a way where he's a disgraced knight, and it's not necessarily for a reason that should disgrace him. And there's so much frustration, and you're like, yeah, be evil. Not really, but like, I understand in this world how you could be. But why you end up respecting Thomas, despite him also probably having done awful stuff that you shouldn't forgive someone for, is you see him get better and want to be better, right? Villains who are forced to be villains aren't that to their core. And that's such a beautiful thing to form a flower of a character around and then just dip it in tar. That's kind of the experience of following Thomas and then gauging whether or not that tar can be wiped off and you still preserve the flower. And Delphine's the one trying to clean it. And all of this is so highbrow. It's so thought out. It would fall flat entirely if this book was not written as well as it is. The prose is just perfect in a hyper-specific sense I've come across in years. I'm not saying it's the best prose I've seen all around, but to fully dip me into this medieval world that's trying to be so accurate that even the view of Christianity matches what's happening in medieval Europe at the time, you gotta dive in your writing style as well. And this truly does feel like it's from the time. I saw someone make a comparison where this story is like The Road meets Canterbury Tales. And that's so accurate, it's kind of frustrating because it just conveys so much of what I've been trying to say in a nice little beautiful box. It even has the parental dynamic, except not by blood. It's just that Thomas is taking care of a girl. You've seen Last of Us, you know what ends up happening. And the dynamic between those two is complemented by Matthew, a priest who's warring internally in a way that actually is deliberately from the author used to clash with our modern framing. I don't want to give away spoilers, but from the context the story is in, there is a sin, so to speak, that now with modern sensibilities is just like, no. But because we know from the narration perspective, we're so immersed in this world, there's also this secret that has to be kept in this shame where it's like, oh yeah, I get why this is the biggest deal for Matthew, and it's something that he has to fight so hard to cover up and repress within himself. But also, there's kind of like a criticism of blind faith with Matthew that I want to reread the book, having it in mind to fully experience it again, because there's so much to that character's specific angling on certain themes that I think I need another pass through before I fully give my thoughts on. It's at this point I realize I'm talking about a horror book for nearly 20 minutes, and I haven't mentioned that the horror elements also benefit from this exquisite writing. There is truly nightmare fuel within this book, and I don't even want to spoil any of the exact detailed monstrosities that are put forward because it's kind of again, beautiful revelation of what's terrifying with how it's presented. Take this Christian aesthetic and dip it into hell coming to earth. Christopher, as a writer, is taking full advantage of that. You're not getting your typical just, oh, exorcism, demonic stuff. And instead, reality is like bending in some fucked up ways. It's a must read for people who enjoyed movies like The Green Knight or want to see what modern evolution of fantasy can do if it reverses back and tries to actually place itself in such a specific time period and realistic but fantastical interpretation of it. But okay, what is this book arguing? What is the criticism that to me made this grimdark truly work? It's actually, in my opinion, using all of this framing and this sensibility that it's accurately interpreting to then turn around, look at us in the modern era, and kind of go, how dare you? Between Two Fires is a stark reminder that we are the products of our circumstances. And it's a rather ridiculous standard to put on flawed humans to expect them to be that. And I think that's why it's important within the Between Two Fires to have these Christian relics and things along those lines be real. Like, I know that's there to remind us that even in the holy divine sense, there is a possibility to redemption. That's Thomas's point, right? He is a bastard in his past, but through being shown the road to glory, he is able to find redemption within himself and everybody on the outside. Right? And as strange as it sounds, I think that's something we need a little bit more now. Like, that is actually a message I fully agree with. Yeah, there are people who've done terrible, awful things to then 30 years later, right? No matter what they've done, just blanketly say you're awful, evil, blah. To me, it feels borderline stupid. In a very evil sense, you are taking someone's humanity away. You are saying, nah, you can't be better. And I'm not saying don't punish people, obviously, but I believe in rehabilitation, not incarceration. I think is the modern way for me to really kind of in an abstract sense talk about what's happening in this book. But even getting into the end, which is going to be polarizing for readers, it actually started becoming more of an action holy smokes than I was expecting, and I won't get in more than that, because this reaches a level of, I almost want to say, dark absurdism at one point that I would have not called working, but it did. No doubt, it did for me. But anyway, Thomas's final stretch in this book is about how, yes, there is punishment for our crimes, right? I believe in rehabilitation, but I also think, yeah, there should be some from a institution. No, obviously it's taken to a extreme. This word choice that happens with the torturing and the path to redemption that's happening for Thomas is hyper specific. And I beg of you, when you get to this point within Between Two Fires, that you pay very close attention to how he's being punished. It seems like it's everything, and I think we're supposed to interpret it as all, but note what the narrative points out. And symbolically, I don't often do this in my review, but I'm going to ask you all, because I'm going to demand you read this book, linked down below with an affiliate link. It's super important and tactical. I don't think everyone will love this book, not nearly as much as me, but for me, this is something you have to at least appreciate. It's an achievement of writing. This is, in the modern landscape of fantasy, I know this came out like a little over 10 years ago, but in the grand scheme, that's modern. This is special, and I think should earn, it's earned the attention it's gotten from things like TikTok and YouTube recently, because it's actually beautiful. It's dark, it's disturbing, it's repulsive, it is demonic, but that's where you can shine the brightest light, right? Light will always overcome shadow. I think that's also a takeaway here. You know, good can overcome evil because light asks no permission before it obliterates darkness. It just burns through. That's why some of the scenes that stick with me the most, despite all the horrific mud slogging through existence and cities to countryside, what I can see clearer than all of that is them laughing at a dumb joke or just this beat of beauty where it feels like everything they've gone through is worth it to experience that second of reprieve together. Yeah, I think I can say I recommend this to Black Company fans, Berserk fans, A Song of Ice and Fire fans, all the grimdark people. But I would even say people who don't necessarily like grimdark and are really just people who can appreciate things like Piranesi, even just these alternate takes on what fantasy can be, will love Between Two Fires. It is gross. It is, yeah, the road meets the Canterbury Tales in a lot of ways, but it's stunning. It's so beautiful. I want to reread this one like right away. There's so many like vivid images still left in my mind and other sensations, smells, jokes. If you know of any books like Between Two Fires, leave them in the comments down below. This is a 10 out of 10. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And if you'd like to get a copy of Between Two Fires, it's down there, an affiliate link, right below a link to my new merch, which is this fantasy map that you can consume your reading journey through. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.